This is my first interview, or this first hosting of an American producer, and only my second one. So please tolerate my technological shortcomings. Anyway, Kelley has a very, very long, interesting story. Our readers are very familiar with her wines, I'm sure, which we've covered since the beginning, since she got started. And the Kelley Fox wines are, to my mind, among the most elegant and very pure, transparent Pinots, if not wines, being made really in the New World. And today, I think she's going to give us some insight into what's motivated her, her mentors, her background, her inspiration, and just give us a little bit of insight into how these wines have turned out the way they have. So Kelley, welcome, and take away, kind of start from the beginning and how you grew, how you landed where you are right now.
Well, there's a very, very long story that would take forever. And then there's the boring narrative story, which that's not a good way of relating. And then the short of it is that truly I feel it was a calling. A lot of things happened in my life and in my path long before I even considered making wine that somehow galvanized in a moment that I remember clearly to this day. And I don't have the story of Uncle Henry giving me, first grows as a child. I didn't grow up like so many New World winemakers. I didn't grow up with it being a tradition passed down through my family. But I'd say that before I was a winemaker, I was a scholar. That was me elevating the fact that I was going to school way too long. I was in college a lot.
Professional student.
A long time, yeah. So I studied.
Scholar does sound better.
For a while, and then I got that degree, and then I ended up moving to Oregon to study biochemistry, not to be a scientist per se, but to understand life, how it works from that point of view. And so here I was in the Willamette Valley, and I was at the end of my biochem undergraduate degree, and I ran into someone. He ended up being the father of my children, and he was planting a vineyard very close to Broadley Vineyard, and we were drinking Broadley 92s, and I was going to the cellar with him, and so skipping a few years, 1997, we were living at Tualatin Vineyard after Bill Fuller had left, and I started working in the vine, started managing the tasting room, and then by year 2000, I just knew that was it. I knew. I did that thing that people do with a journal, and I just have one entry in that journal. It was, I'm going to be a winemaker. And then that's it. I saved it for a long time just because of how funny that was. So.
And so you were at Corval, you were at Oregon State?
Oregon State, another ag school. I went to 2 ag schools. So.
You were at Texas A&M, right?
Yeah. I wanted to become a vet. I wanted to be a large game vet in South Africa and to kill poachers. My whole life.
So where was your first winery job? Where you were actually really getting your hands dirty and getting paid for it?
My hands weren't really getting dirty at this one, but so I did harvest lab work at Willamette Valley Vineyards in 98 or something. But the first one was Tory Moore, and it was right on the heels of Patty and Jim leaving.
Okay, right.
And so Bob McRitchie, you know Bob.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a veteran in our industry, lovely man, but he was kind of steering that ship after that huge and dramatic transition. And that was my first winery job. I became a cellar rat. And the first day I saw a fitting and there was a triclover in my hand, I just was like, I love this shit. Like, it was bad. Within a year, I was general manager, and they gave me the title winemaker, which is nuts. So I hired consultants and things like that at that job. But I remember at Tory Moore, that was my first job, and it was the first time to learn anything. And all the bottlings were single vineyard bottlings. There were Seven Springs, the Olson Vineyard, Temperance Hill Vineyard, And these wines were really elegant, and they left the notes behind. And I remember like going, oh my God, this is a huge opportunity, but come on now. Like, I'm not one of those people that just says, oh, I can do that. Like, I'm the person who studies and studies and studies first before I even think I have a voice. So I took those things and poured over all of Patty's notes and looked at everything like it was the Bible, so that was my
Well,
first.
that gave you the opportunity to work with some of Oregon's, or you could say the United States iconic Pinot Noir vineyards. I mean, those are some of the greats.
Like Seven Springs, really. But next door was David Lett at Irie, right?
Right.
So, and we had very different work days, I noticed. So our harvest was a shitstorm. And in fact, I hired a circus company, a circus tent, and got a permit from McMinnville. That would never happen now. And converted that dead end street where the railroad tracks are, and the rubber mat factory. I don't know if you ever went over there. I converted that to a crush pad, moved the press out there, and I was chaining those nut fermenters that they still use at PGC, the wooden ones with the black liner, chaining them up to the mast and dumping them into the press all night by myself. And it was just crazy. Like there's one pick late in the season where there was no more room. We had like 85 fermenters crammed in there. So we processed into picking bins and put a blue tarp over it and call it a day. And we're like punching down outside, like as if no one was going to do anything. And so that's how I met David, and David would come over there and, give me shit. And we became really good friends, really fast. Yeah.
And so he's obviously one of your early mentors. And you also, I know you learned a little bit about vineyards with Jimmy Brooks.
Jimmy he's a year younger than me. And it's hard to explain the bond of our generation. But I'm an old ass Gen X. I'm like the oldest Gen X you can possibly be. And I have strong generational identity with Gen X. And so we listen to a lot of the same music, and I was going to shows that he liked. And we had, he used to come around Tory Moore a lot because there's someone else there that I think he was liked. And so Di Crisp had just helped him get the head winemaker job, coming out of assistant winemaker under Laurent at Willackenzie to head winemaker of this huge, vineyard that eventually became biodynamic, Montazzi Vineyard, and they had extra fruit to sell. So he was trying to sell me fruit at Tory Moore, and we went over there, and I still remember the glass that he gave me with his barrel thief of Highland, because as you remember, during that time, what kind of wines we were making, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was given instructions at Tory Moore at the time that it should be so big that you could put a golden spoon in it and it would stand in that wine. All right. So I go over and try, Jimmy's showing me all these wines, and he puts one in my glass, and it just felt like this freshness come over me, and it was full of minerals, and it gave me space. And I just go, Jimmy, what is that? And he said, it's Highland. But all of his wines were like that. All of his wines had this restraint and beauty and space. So,
and that was other than, I guess David Lett's wines were that way, but that was not a very common style back then at all.
Jimmy definitely did not allow others to define him in any way.
And wasn't that one of the first, if not the first, biodynamic vineyards in Oregon?
I'm really old. I hit double nickels a few weeks ago, so my memory's not great. And I've had a couple of concussions. But I'm going to say probably yes. But I don't want to offend anyone if that's not true. But
no, I think Montazzi and Doug Tennell was in.
Michael Etzel, and there's some others. Montazzi's huge. There's other. Bergstrom did it for a while, and or for a long time.
Right.
I mean, they still do.
Yep.
There were others.
Because that's really fairly common now.
Yes.
More common than uncommon, I think. It's
every
year.
Yeah, when I was first introduced to that, it was actually, I hid it. I hid that, like my interest in that. People thought it was crazy, and voodoo or automatic bad wine and stuff like that. So
So after Tory Moore, is that when you went to work with Scott Wright at Scott Paul?
no, there's a little in between period. So it's just the I remember very clearly when I left Tory Moore, I drove straight to Patricia Green Cellars.
Right.
And that was an afternoon I won't forget. Ever. No, Eric Homaker found me in the parking lot of the Dundee Bistro. And I was with Sterling. He goes, "Hey, I heard you left Tory Moore and we're doing the studio thing. And, do you want to
Carlton
come?"
Winemaker Studio.
Yeah. So I went and worked with Eric Homaker while it was being built around us in 2002. And then I left after Harvest 2003, which is then when I went to Irie. Yeah.
Okay. And you were at Irie for how long?
Just a year. So I bottled the 03s, which is about 8,500 cases that Maitland Finley helped make with David. And then I made and bottled the 04s, except for there's a couple reserves that I didn't bottle before I left.
Okay.
But the time doesn't really relate linearly to the impact. We got a lot done in that time. David.
You learned a lot.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Look, I had an influence on him too, but not the winemaking. I mean, I can't lie. Like, he did stuff that he just didn't do with me. And he just go, "Kelley, to the moon." Like, he would do that. Like, he got a pressure washer that had propane for heat because of me. He got a forklift that runs on propane instead of gas for me. I used to have to jump start his little forklift every time I used it. And by the way, it was an FOB point too. So we were like a warehouse for all the trucks to come in for all the orders to go to the major cities. And I did that too. So it was like, "David, you don't want those fumes around those wines." And he was like, "Yeah, you're right." But so, I mean, but yeah, he influenced me a lot. And he didn't do it like, "This is how you make wine." It wasn't like that. Like, within the first week, I just stopped doing that. Like, he goes, "Kelley, really? Like, I've been doing this like 40 years and you're going to reinvent." He goes, "No reinventing the wheel, just observe." Like, so I did. We had a lot of fun.
I know he had a reputation that I think he obviously cultivated for being Papa Pinot and being what's the right word? Contrary and that, but he was actually a very sweet guy.
He was one of the most tender-hearted people I've known.
Yeah, I never. The only time I ever saw him acting that way was when he was in public.
He had a lot of strong opinions about meetings and hypocrisy and the act of being a winemaker. That bothered him a lot.
So was it from there to Scott Wright? Yeah. Scott Paul?
And backing up to Scott Wright, we had met at the Steamboat Conference, and the Durans flew in when he was hired at DDO, and they were there too to kind of usher him in. And so I met Scott then, and we really liked each other. And I also helped him a bit at the studio when his wines were there. Yeah. So and then he said, he always said, "One day I'm going to build a winery and you're going to be my winemaker." I was like, "Oh yeah, I get told things all the time." Right. So, but that actually did happen. So I became his winemaker in 2005, and we started that first vintage at the studio. And then we moved in during harvest of 06 to the building that he built.
And I believe that's when I met you.
Yes, it
was 2006.
Yeah.
We talked about the giant microbes toys that are.
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh, my CDC flashcards.
I had my daughters actually had the stuffed animals.
I still have those cards. The CDC disease card.
Pretty interesting. And actually, I just the other day happened to dig up. It was a hot day, and you were actually heading out at the end of the tasting. You were going up to Portland for tango classes.
Oh, tango? It might have been. Well, I took tango. No, it was salsa.
Salsa. It was a hot day. It was a hot day, and I had to buy a hat. And I actually just found it.
Oh my God! You still have it. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
did.
throw I don't throw much away, but
Well, yeah, I did a lot of that starting in, I guess, '08, really like a lot because once I moved to Portland, it was very close, this place called Cha Cha Club. And actually, I learned from all these, I didn't take lessons. I learned directly from like grandpas. And I learned so much about how to observe and respond. I seriously think that had an effect on my winemaking, like to to uh, to observe and respond and to follow.
well, I mean, the wines you were making with Scott were definitely on the elegant side for
Mhm.
the for that era,
Yeah.
without a question. But at some point, I want to say around 2008 vintage, 2009 vintage, I noticed that your wine, there was a pretty distinct shift closer to where your wines are now.
The-
And
yeah, I've been on a personal journey too. Yeah.
but I mean more elegance, lighter colors.
Mhm.
Um, you were you working with whole clusters with Scott?
No, we did one thing with it for an experiment that was based on, I can't remember the monk's name, but no, generally not. That was not a thing.
And there was also more new oak there.
There was new oak, yes. 10%, something like that.
Yeah, I mean it was I mean the wines definitely stood out as being in the elegant school. If you had to have sort of binary school at Oregon Pinot, Scott's wines were definitely on the elegant, for lack of a better term, old world side. But clearly, where you are now is to the extreme in a lot of ways. And I'm just wondering how that path was. That an evolution or was it a revolution? Was there something that pushed you hard towards where you are now, or was it a progressive thing?
It was very gradual. It was on a continuum. And it was, Scott taught me a lot about wine through his Burgundy producers. I learned a lot. He set me up. Like I went there and just drinking Burgundies. No, I'm not trying to make Burgundy. I make Oregon
Oh,
wine, but some people, yeah. But this, and also my listening to music and my training, my education. I think it's really important to have space and unfinished edges and things that have movement. I mean, I'm bringing in so many different teachings that have come to me in my life. I'm very fortunate to have those teachings. And even studies in Eastern thought have influenced this indirectly. So, but also drinking wine, a lot of wine. Like I think that it became much more rapid when I started drinking wine of the world. Rather, the first thing I did was my 10 years of silence of just Oregon, 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 and study, tasting groups, tasting everyone's stuff, collaboration, intellectual collaboration, and peer groups. And God, I learned so much. And I took all the seminars, and I was probably an asshole in some of those. I was the one who's like, but what about this and stuff like that. And then I stopped doing all that. And then it's like, okay, it's time for me to drink the world. And I'm still super excited and motivated and hungry to try other people's wines from other places. And so I also had friends. Oh, man, was I lucky. Through Scott Paul, I met a group of friends. We call ourselves the gang, and they're my friends at the wine locker. And so they shared things with me that you can't buy really anymore. And I just learned so much just through drinking wine in friendship, not analyzing any of those times where we were analyzing these wines. And
just
so
absorbing.
absorbing and being open and absorbing. And uh, over time, I just realized that the wines that excited me the most were the wines that were wines of place. Um,
It's hard for somebody who's in the same position that you were in, if they're in that position now, the opportunity to go to verticals of Raveneau or Meunier or Freddie Meunier.
I'm
Uh,
very fortunate.
they're few and far between nowadays. There's no question.
Economically, it's impossible. And so I'm old and I started earlier, and my friends
You're younger than me, so
my friends are older than me and started way earlier, right? So they're sharing this. I mean, I've had a really good education. I did not take it for granted, not one bit. And so I don't know. I think it's just an aesthetic to appreciate wines that are transparent and giving space and sitting with you and inviting a relationship rather than one that's just like, Dick Van Dyke and I guess it's Mary Poppins when he's got that band, he's hitting all the instruments. Like, I don't want to drink that, I love the show, but you know what I mean? Like,
And so you set up shop across the street from Scott in Carlton.
Yep.
And you were in that space for a short while?
2007 through, and Scott was my biggest supporter of this, by the way. 2007 through harvest of 2014.
Right.
And then, I was there 10 years and things changed. And then I had to figure out my shit really fast, right? Because I don't have a huge company that I'm drawing from. I don't have capital coming from, my family like that. And I was able to, after being turned down actually by a lot of banks, it was the most heartbreaking thing ever, because they believed in me, but I just didn't have the assets. With the help of a private lender, I was able to grow Kelley Fox Wines, starting in 2015 from 750 cases in 2014 to now it's about 3,400 cases.
And you actually have an employee.
I broke down and got an employee. I'm so glad I did. He's great. You'll meet him, but he's fantastic. Totally Marylander.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the vineyards you work with, because the roster of sites that you've been working with, and that now I learned new sites, Carter and Canary Hill, that you'll be starting with 2019. Marsh, Weber, Highland, Durant, Freedom Hill. These are, going back to St. Louis, these are the iconic sites, and clearly they can pick and choose who they want to work with. How did you get started with that? Was Marsh the first that you started working with?
It was, and that's why Scott Paul had it as well. It was through Sterling, my ex-husband, because he landed the Jacob Hart vineyard management position under Rex Hill, right? Okay. So he was managed, and Marsh was under Rex Hill's umbrella at that time in 2000.
So Marsh Vineyard was the first vineyard that you started working with.
Yeah, Marsh and Momtazi. And you already heard how I was introduced to Momtazi through Jimmy Brooks. So Marsh was both in the same year 2000. So Sterling started that job in 2000, and my first time to meet, that's me, after, oh my God, that was after shoot thinning with my brother. That was the coldest, wettest shoot thinning experience of my life that day. The photo that you're seeing, and those are in the long rows at Marsh Vineyard, planted in 1970. So the first time I met the Marsh family was at Loie Marsh's wake. I went with, I think my daughters, they were so young. And we went to Loie's wake, and I met the Marsh family. I met Jim Marsh Sr., I met Martha, she's like my sister. That Jim Marsh Sr. and Loie had 5 children. Martha Marsh is their oldest daughter, and the mother of Jimmy, as you know, Jim Marsh, Arterberry Marsh. So that's how I came to know the Marsh family. And Jim Marsh Sr. and I hit it off very well from the beginning, and he wanted me to do well. And so my 2007 Marsh was what is now the Red Barn Blocks. So it's just right in front of the Red Barn there. And it was actually rejected by someone because it was kind of rainy, and it was 2007. And I remember going with Samuel Chevalier, who was a sommelier from Quebec. And I said, dude, how could we, this is the best thing. He goes, so I took it just like, and it was such a good wine. It's still good, that 2007. Yeah, it's that block. And so
this is the one that's right by the road.
Yeah. So I don't have that anymore, but Jim Marsh Sr. would call me, he'd just give me a call. He'd go, Kelley, I've been thinking, I want you to take this block. He didn't ask me if I could or like pay for it or something. And he even put a deal in it. Like in 2009, the Mirabai started because of one of his ideas. He goes, I haven't done the the Red Hills Pinot, the Red Barn Pinot. That contract with archery has ended. And well, I'll tell you what, I want you to take block 8 Pomard, and you take 2/3, I take 1/3, and if you bought it, you get to keep the fruit. And it's like, he didn't even, it's like, bye. Like he didn't even ask me, you know? So, and everything that he's ever done, it's such a gift. And I've been working, oh my God, there he is. And I don't know, I just love him. And his belief in me as a winemaker, and we've been through some emotional times on my end. He's seen me go through a lot. You know, my path has not been easy because I didn't choose the easy path. And we just talked on the phone not long after his birthday in April, and I was in tears because I said, Jim, you know, look what you've done. Like you've allowed me to work with your farm, and I want you to know your wines are all over the world. Your wines are in Switzerland, they're in Luxembourg, they're in Japan, South Korea, they're in Budapest. They're everywhere. And everyone can see how much love you and Loie put into your farm. And thank you, because that's how I feel every day about that.
And I guess now the family only sells fruit to 2 people.
The Pinot, I think, yeah.
Pinot,
Oh no,
right?
wait, no, the Pinot, there's
Effie.
a fee.
So Effie and you.
Yeah.
I believe that's it.
For the Pinot, I believe, yeah. And I think that's gonna stay that way. Jimmy just took in, you know, after the Scott Paul change, you know, he reined in those blocks, and so now it's mostly Jimmy, and then I have about 6 acres of Pinot there. Yeah.
Which it's a vineyard that I think is pretty widely regarded in your community as unquestionably Grand Cru, if you had to make that kind of a classification. I know a lot of producers envy you for having 6 acres in that vineyard.
Well, I love those vines more than they would. I'm there. I go there. I work in them. I love them. I couldn't leave Oregon because of those vines.
Right. And what do you think makes that plot so distinctive? Or the wine it produces?
The Marsh family. It's their love, and they're living there. And also, it is a farm. It is not a monoculture. You know, a lot of people that come into Oregon, I see this, it's happening all over the hill right now, which is we call Warden Hill Road. You know, go in, rip at the land, plant this vineyard, you know, VSP 4x6, blah, 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 and it's clear it, and then you have a tree. Like, this is a farm. It has huge patches of field, and it has a forest with a spring, which I'm not going to tell you where that is. It has 100-year-old cherry trees right next to vines, my Royal Land block. It has 100-year-old walnut trees that no one's cutting those down next to my long rows, which go into the Marsh Vineyard bottling.
And the whole family lives. The whole family lives right. The whole family lives right there.
And so there's houses on the end trellis posts for western bluebirds and violet green swallows. You hear bird song there. It's fully alive with lots of trees. So I think that it's very special because it has so much natural harmony. And there's also a rare blue butterfly that I've seen there that I believe is a Fender's blue butterfly, which is the ultimate mark of harmony. So it, you know, to me, it's not like just, oh, that land's good. Oh, that exposition's good. It's the breeze, and it's the trees around, and it's like the songbirds and many, many, many things.
Some of a lot of parts. And Weber, you've been working with?
Yeah, I always wanted to work with Weber because there used to be these things at the Marsh Red Barn, and I'm sure you've been back in the day when Jim Marsh Sr. would always go to the barn on Saturdays, kind of right when it was about to close for retail. And people just come there and hang out and shoot the shit. And I used to do that sometimes. And Art Weber would be there sometimes. And Art was a very good friend of Jim's. In fact, Vivian, I was on her porch last summer getting to know her, Vivian Weber. She's an amazing human being. And she told me a story, and I may not get it right, but she said, yeah, we were looking for David Lett. I think they were both scholars before. And they got really interested in wine, wanted a vineyard. So they're looking for David Lett, and no one would tell them where David Lett lived. They're scared to. So he said, well, shoot, we'll just drive up Warden Hill Road. We'll find him, I bet, which of course he wasn't on that road. He was on Bremen Orchard Tract. So he sees a hand-painted sign, 21 acres for sale. And this man standing in front, he goes, oh, there's David Lett. They pull over, it's Jim Marsh Sr. So they bought their first 21 acres from Jim and Loie. And that original acreage is now owned by Holleran, I think. And then they expanded the acreage. So it's really, some of it used to be part of Marsh Farm. But they owned a lot of land on that hill. Archery Summit bought some. And yeah.
And just switching back really quick to Marsh. Marsh is Pomard in Wadensville. Is that right?
Yes. Although I suspect some of the vines in my old block, but Jim said, no, it couldn't be anything but those things. So.
Okay. And at Weber, is it the same thing?
It's Pomard. Back before 88, as you know, the clones that people brought in, besides Corey selection, right? We don't know exactly what that is. They were Pomard and Wadensville. And then people were wanting to make wines that were more ripe.
Yeah.
And so they brought in Dijon clones, which ripened earlier. And so that started around 88, 89. So if you have old vines, it's going to be Pomard, Corey, or Wadensville.
Sure. Okay. And do you work with many of the Dijon clones?
I have worked with, well, in my jobs, yes.
But I mean, now.
I'm trying to think whether I do or not. If I did, it would be 115, but I'm trying to figure out where that would be. It's Canary Hill.
Okay.
No, it's Pomard.
And in Highland, are you working with Corey?
Corey, yeah.
Yeah. So you got that piece. That's nice.
Yeah.
Or part of that piece.
Yeah.
And how old are those vines at Highland, the Corey vines?
They're 88 self-rooted. They kind of like, the vines are trained in this kind of weird way that looks like the front of a Viking ship. I kind of like that look.
And how much wine are you able to make off of I guess we could say Marsh, Weber, Highland, roughly?
Well, right now I have 6 acres at Weber, 6 acres at Marsh. And then actually my last year of Highland was 2019. I don't know. I can't do the math right now. It depends.
But not a lot.
I look in the winery and I think about where my wines are, and it's like, God, I just don't have that much in here. Like I don't have a lot of barrels. Just say 2.5 tons to the acre times 12. That's Marsh and Weber. And Highland gets about 3 tons an acre normally. And that I had about 1.7 acres.
And you're getting, and from Durant, you get white fruit, white grapes?
Yes, Chardonnay. That's a Dijon clone. And I'm not a clone person anymore with anything, but I can't remember which one it is. It's the more elegant one. It's on the back label or in my tasting notes, 95 or 97 or something.
Okay, right. And also at Freedom Hill?
Freedom Hill's Pinot Blanc. And so I don't know what clone it is. I didn't even ask. I love that. I love those, the way the trellising is. I call it Napa flop, but they're trees and then the canes go down. And so the fruit is in the dappled light, all protected with the leaves, but still getting sun.
What was your first white wine made? What vintage?
2000. Because it was a Tory Moore. There's Chardonnay, Pinot Gris.
But I mean, under your label.
Pinot Blanc from Freedom Hill.
Okay. And how much white do you make relative to red? I know it's not much.
I'm gonna have to add it on my hands now.
Well,
Okay,
just roughly.
300 plus 600. I'm not counting Pinot Gris because it's pink.
Right.
I'd say uh, uh, 600 cases of white wine right now, and then
Okay.
I added. Oh, I'm getting some Duke's Vineyard, DUX. I mean the Latin word for leader, but I think people pronounce it ducks. They're cuttings from Bill Wayne's Abbey Ridge that Andy Humphrey planted. Jimmy Marsh made Chardonnay from there. So I'm
Okay,
going to be getting some of that this year.
cool. Can we talk a little bit about recent vintages? I mean, things have been hot like everywhere on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And how has that impacted, your work and obviously the style that you're shooting for?
I really feel that I'm skating off of the age of the vines right now, but that time will come to an end at some point, right? Because their old vines are going really deep into the earth, and they're flowering later. They're taking their time. I'm letting them hang more fruit because they're old, and not a ton of ridiculous amounts of fruit. But so far, I've been able to, because of the vineyards themselves, deal with it. If young vines or sedimentary vines, warm sites, that's harder, right? But I don't have vineyards like that. But I'm having to be. I'm gonna probably. I don't know how I'm gonna do it. So far, so good. But it's definitely a warming trend. So
And that's obviously runs counter to your style. I mean, the style of your wines.
right. But I'm not gonna fight vintage too much, either. Like I'm not gonna do that. There has to be a balance. My 19s, I barely cleared 12 and a half across the board though, just so you know,
Okay.
percent.
And that's
And
not
they're
an
good.
easy. And you didn't harvest them in July or anything.
Hell no. No. No, I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to knock on wood and realize that my time's going to come. And when that time comes, I'm going to do what I have to do. You know?
And 18 was obviously a hot one.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I have the 18 Mirbai right here, which is Weber and Marsh.
Yeah.
And it's on the darker side
Yeah.
than previous years to me, my initial impression.
It's 18. Yeah. I let 18 be 18 in my cellar. It was fun. Not every year is going to be 2017 for me or 2019. My mirror buys 12.5% alcohol, maybe, but it still has a lot of color. So
Yeah. How often do your wines skate above 13?
not often, not often.
No, no. And 17 is actually turning out to be a pleasant surprise.
Yeah. I knew mine were going to take an extra long time, but I love the vintage for me, but it's just not like one of those vintages for my wines where you're just going to pop that open and just go, oh, total pleasure. They needed some time.
Yeah. And 16?
16 was easier to drink younger, despite that I did 100% whole cluster. They had a lot of light, and I think they're better now than they were when they were first opened, but I felt like they were easy to enjoy, quite young.
And was 15 the vintage where you shifted to whole cluster entirely?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, so 17 is 50% whole cluster, 18 is about 30% whole cluster, or 50 maybe.
15 was 100%.
Yeah.
Okay. 16?
100%.
Okay. And 19?
30%, 30 or 40. I do it based on the feel of the year and what the fruit is telling me.
Right. Okay. And new oak?
0. The
And
last
when
new oak was in 11. If you
that's the
even
last.
if you even say new oak around wine, it'll just be like barrel. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I have total Princess and the Pea wines. It just doesn't work. I've had so many Burgundies where I'm so sensitive to oak, where I've not tasted any oak at all, and they were 100% oak. but it's not like a goal for me to have like make a wine that, oh, I can really get some more oak in that one because it's so good. Like, I don't think like that.
Do you bottle on the early side, relatively speaking, would you
I
say?
do. I do. Um, I was just having an interesting conversation about this with someone. So, unlike our brothers and sisters in Burgundy, I think that in generally speaking, if you're not making if you're not really doing extractive winemaking here in Oregon, I don't think that we have the levels of tannin and also sometimes acidity to warrant extra microoxidation for the extra 6 months that would really benefit uh, our friends in Burgundy with their vineyards. And this is a sweeping generalization, right? Because it's easier. There's always exceptions. And I noticed with my winemaking over the years here, I've worked with wineries that over harvested a 16-month élevage versus before harvest. And what I fear for my wines in particular is to have this kind of drying out of my wines and having to starting bottling with already behind and having to add more sulfur because they're a little bit dried out and almost oxidized. That's just my personal thing. And I think that for me, bottling my wines before harvest for the vineyards that I have and the kind of winemaking I do is allowing the wines to have as much life and freshness bottled in there for you later as possible.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
So, excuse me.
Oh, no.
So, sulfur is something that you are obviously very careful with.
I'm careful with sulfur, but I do use it and I don't apologize for using it. And I'm not saying other people should use it. I'm just saying for what I'm doing and what I'm trying to bring to you, the drinker, the experience I'm bringing to you, the use of sulfur has been very good for my wines. That said, I don't use a shit ton of sulfur. So I might use a little bit during processing. And then if ML finishes quite in advance ahead of bottling, I'll add some after mallow because I really don't want VA and other things like that. And I'm not saying that if you don't add sulfur, it will automatically have VA. I'm not going to get into those arguments. But with my wine, I do that. And then I just top it up before bottling. I usually bottle my wines at around 20 parts free. But I've noticed because I export my wines to Japan and we have to do analyses, that my totals and frees are much lower than I thought they were. So I don't know the science of what's happening in the bottles, but and I use independent laboratories at bottling because I just need to have that for myself. My total sulfurs are rarely above 50 parts, which is pretty low for, in some cases, like the Highland 17, it's probably 30 parts total because it finished mallow right before bottling. So.
And that low sulfur thing is popular in Japan.
Right, but they don't even though who my importer is, it's Racine's, and they're considered a natural wine importer. They dealt with Burgundies and Barolos and things like that, but they've never clocked me on my use of sulfur, not once.
Because I know that the natural wine and low to zero intervention wine thing in Japan is huge part of the fine wine market.
But Lafarge is a natural wine producer and they use sulfur.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot do.
I don't think anyone's like saying, I don't want that one.
Oh no, I take all the Lafarge I could get if I could afford it.
Yeah. Yeah, I even typed out a statement about sulfur that occasionally I get these like da 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 da, and I'll just say, well, in alchemy, sulfur is one of the three principles of soul alchemy, the principle of creation and life. I'll just use, it's like, if you want to get energetic about it, I've done that already. Like, I'm the weirdest person you'll ever meet there. So I have my own reasons that circle all the way back to using it again. So that way.
Oh, I mean, you have to make the wine. I mean,
But I've had great wines that had no silver. Yeah. But I just don't think that's the point for me, like silver, not silver. That's what I'm trying to like take off my, like if you don't use it, that's great. Like if it's had so many good sans souffle wines. But my wine, I don't want them to be defined on sulfur or not sulfur.
I think things have moved past that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't want them to be defined by that or even by how I make them or me. Actually, I want to be out of that equation too. I would hope that people, when they're drinking my wines, they have just the slight feeling, whether it's conscious or not, of being taken out of the human condition in whatever way that is because of those vineyards.
Yeah. Ask you another question. You mentioned earlier you just recently seen some people from the restaurant business.
Yes.
How much of your sales are dependent on restaurants? And you can probably tell where I'm going with this, with what's going on right now.
It's nothing I don't think about every day. Quite a bit, you know. I haven't done the percentage because I don't bug my importers and distributors like how much of this is off premise versus on, but you know that because I'm exporting all of my wines, it's on premise. And Scandinavia has been able to, because of the way they do things, they've been ordering through this. The Netherlands just put in an order, but yeah, it's had a huge effect. My FOB, my sales to distributors in the United States have dropped 25% against last year when I was like smoking it before this happened. Like I had a record Q1 and then, yeah.
But you've developed a pretty healthy direct to consumer model, from what I understand, from what I gather, from what I hear from people.
I'm working on it. That's why I have Dustin, who isn't socially awkward like me. No, it's important to me because I like the relationships too. It's a human model, not just an economic model for me.
Yeah, a number of our subscribers I know have been to see you, and I always get nice reports back about being treated well. And
I love when I love people coming to the winery, and if I can, I'll take the time. And things get kind of weird sometimes. It's true. Like,
well, it happens when you're like two of the four hands.
But no, I meant weird in a good way. But yeah. Oh, I want you to know that I'm also making a early Muscat Gruner, and I poured it for the first time today. And it's skin contact. It's really good.
So you're going
with sulfur.
You're gonna try no sulfur?
It has sulfur.
Okay. So baby steps.
No, you know what it is? I love white wine so much. That's what I drink most of the time is white wine.
You drink a lot of Chablis, right?
Yeah, but also other white wines and Gros Champagne. But white wine is just so nice, and it's just I want more. I want to have more of that because I'm doing the Pinot thing, and that is my work. That's the focus of my work. But what about you can't drink that every day.
You can try.
I mean, you can't drink. Well, I don't know if people can afford it. I can't.
I was going to ask you also with the white wine subject. I've been seeing an increasing number of quite good Sauvignon Blancs coming out of Oregon. And I know that you like probably the Chavignon from Vatan.
Yes, I know that.
Is that something that interests you?
I'll just drink gems.
I've been very pleasantly surprised over the last, definitely 10 years, but increasingly the last 5 years. And I mean, hey, look, it works in Sancerre.
Do you think it's the warmer weather too? Because that's helping that there's some people who've been really working hard to say, hey, we have really great Sauvignon Blanc here in Oregon. There's a couple of wineries that have been doing that for a long time. And now I see it's getting traction with other wineries. but no, it's not something I'm going to do.
No, never say never.
Oh, I'm not going to do that. But I also said that about Pinot Gris, which I don't want to discuss right now.
And what about Riesling?
I love it. I took my path and I'm just going on that path is my answer. And other people are making really nice Riesling, and that's just not where I'm going.
Okay.
There's only so much I can do in this life, you know?
So a attendee is asking if you could give people an idea about what ideal drinking windows for your wines. Obviously, that's a very general question. It depends on vintage.
That's what you do. You do the drinking window. Like some of them are like so specific. Okay, so for the single block Pinot Noirs, the serious ass Pinot Noirs with the white label, they're really best after a couple years, and I'd say 2 to 7 years they're really nice. And it depends on whether you like older wines or not, and the older wine character. But I fully expect them to age well for 20 years. I remember visiting a dear friend who is the winemaker. Well, he's one of the owners of a domain in Chasson-Montrachet. And I remember him pulling out an old bottle. You know how it happens. They pull out the old bottle. It's like, oh my God, thank you so much. And he poured it for me. It's so old, it had hairs on it, white burgundy. And I was like, yes. And he didn't pour it for himself. And I said, what's going on? Are you just doing this for me? I feel so badly. And he said, no, I don't like the older white wines so much. It's like white burgundy. And I remember that just stuck out to me at the time, but I'm starting to find myself in my old age of really appreciating wines when they're full of life and I do love old wines, but I'm just saying I'm kind of going back to I think you might enjoy my wines more within 5 years, 8 years, 10 maybe. I might change my mind again.
Well, no, it's it's obviously there's a debate, but I do a lot of winemakers that I know in a lot of regions have said that they do like seeing the wines in all that exuberance of youth, rather than when they get old. And people say old wine tastes like old wine, or some people say that.
Right.
And
some old wines don't. Sometimes I've had some very revelatory experiences where I had to just wonder if I'd lost my mind. Like I saw the number of the vintage on the bottle and what I was tasting. It's like, how does this happen? Is that a goal for me in its own right? No. I just shoot for the stars with everything I can. And I think that it will age quite well because I made wine at Irene. I kind of know what that looks like. But let's face it, my first Kelley Fox vintage was 2007. So TBD.
Yeah. Another question for you. Somebody's asking if you could share some of your thoughts on making Chardonnay from Durant. What are you looking for, and what sort of general actions, techniques help you get there?
I hadn't made Chardonnay since Irie, so I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and it was just like winging it, honestly. When I made the picking decision and everything, but I didn't know what I wanted to do in the winery. I mean, I go to the vineyards all the time, so it wasn't like, oh, I just picked it and made it in the winery. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I'm not a Chardonnay expert in the making, only the drinking.
Okay.
So I can say that with the Durant Chardonnay, what I did was I fermented it in concrete amphora tanks. I've learned from my experiences drinking white Burgundy that there's some places that still ferment their Burgundy in concrete vats, and then after primary rack it to barrel. And I had a Chevalier Montrachet that particularly appealed to me, and I asked the person who was importing it, and they said, yeah, this is how they do it. And I'm not sure, that's not making the wine, right? That's not going to make the wine what it is. But I already had one of them, So I bought another one. So I fermented the Durant Chardonnay in concrete and then uninoculated, and it burned through, finished in like 2 weeks. And then I racked it to neutral French oak barrels for élevage and then allowed it to complete mallow.
Okay.
Bottled it in 11 months. No botnage. Yeah. Does that help answer the question or?
Yes, he said, thank you very much.
Oh, okay. That was easy for me then.
Good, good. So we're going to sort of wrap things up here.
Okay.
And I want to thank you for all your time,
Thank you, Josh.
as usual. It's always intriguing. I wish I could be out there in person, but
Well, I miss you greatly. We all do, I'm sure.
not as much as I miss you guys. It's just being able to be in the in the different regions with the people. But this is it's a pretty good substitute. If this had all happened 20 years ago, we wouldn't be doing anything like this. Maybe we'd be sending faxes to each other or something.
Maxis. Oh my God.
I still have one.
Oh, of course you do.
I still have my AOL account. How about that?
Oh. Okay,
Anyway.
we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, great. Again, thank you so much. And good luck with your bottling. You just took delivery of your bottles for your 2019s today.
Well, yeah, that was just for the Mirabai, which I'm bottling not this week, but the next week. The
Okay.
Mirabai 19.
Great. Well, we look forward to trying it and all the rest of the ones.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for all your time.
Thank you.